to speak and for putting on this great Soil Health Week. We're certainly happy to be here. We can just kind of do a few quick introductions from our team that we'll be sharing today. And if you out there in Zoom world would like to introduce yourself in the chat, please do. Share your name, where you're from. I know it's kind of a gloomy Friday morning here in Indiana. I suspect that it might be a gloomy Friday morning, potentially snowy Friday morning in other places as well. But we're happy to be here, and we're happy that you all are able to join us today. So my name is Emily Usher. I am the project manager for the Diverse Corn Belt team. And we have Dr. Carmen Blubaugh, who's a research scientist at University of Illinois. We have Dr. Liz Maynard, who is a clinical engagement professor at Purdue University. We also have Dr. Rebecca Traldi, who's a postdoctoral social scientist at Purdue University. We do not have Dr. Linda Prokopi with us today, but Dr. Prokopi is the project director for this project. So we can kind of get things started here. So just to kind of give you a little bit of a background and a little bit of an idea of how and why we believe this is an important project. So in 2020, the Corn Belt, so when we say Corn Belt, we mean Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa. Corn Belt farmers produced 448 million tons of corn and soybeans on 138 million acres with the combined worth of $91.4 billion. So as we can see, sort of the Corn Belt is working for some, but not for all. So we have documented, or there has been documented increased farm bankruptcies, declining farm employment, climbing farmer suicides, as well as increased environmental degradation. So on top of all that, we have the COVID-19 pandemic and all of those related disruptions, everything from the supply chain just to everybody's general life disruptions. So evidence suggests that solutions that include shifting agricultural systems towards greater diversity on the farm, on the landscape, and in agricultural markets, as well as a need for a systemic analysis and assessment of pathways forward to reach resilient intensification at those levels. So these struggles expose a lack of resilience, persistent failures, as well as diminishing returns for the agricultural systems based on the current monoculture. So our plan for the Diverse Corn Belt project is to explore diversity at 3 separate levels. So those levels are the farm level, the market level, and the landscape level. At the farm level, we're exploring extended rotations, so including small grains or forage crops in rotation, perennial forage or perennial bioenergy crops, agroforestry, horticultural food crops, and grazed livestock. At the landscape level, so we're looking at the impacts of wide-scale adoption of these alternative farming systems that are climate smart and reach profit and yield goals, as well as ecosystem services goals. And at the market level, we're exploring sort of the diversity of markets for both producers and consumers, as well as the need for the needs of diverse people along that value chain. So kind of long and short, the Diverse Corn Belt team will generate evidence-based visions and frameworks to inform a more diversified dominant system. This more diversified dominant system will be capable of overcoming persistent market and policy barriers to support a transition to more resilient intensification and more economically, environmentally, and socially sustainable systems.
So Emily has outlined the goals and the general means of what we're thinking, more diversity in the Corn Belt. How do we take this forward? And trying to wrap my head around this, I go back to thinking about when one is making any kind of change or plans, whether it's at an individual, family, community level, there's some common steps that one goes through. And I expect that many of you have gone through some sort of a similar process, either for your farm or your business or your work and your family life, or maybe for a simpler, smaller example, even for planning for a vacation. There's some kind of steps that you go through. So we, the first of the 3 main steps in this is the information gathering stage. And in the blue, you see that objective 1 labeled as co-production. And co-production is kind of a word was a little bit unfamiliar to me until recently, but it just means that researchers and people involved in agriculture, we're creating new knowledge as a joint project. It's not just the researchers defining the questions and approaches. So in our information gathering through surveys, we'll be gathering information about readiness of the supply chain, consumers, and technical support system. There's an on-farm research component that's going to address questions about soil health, biological diversity, water and air quality, and other biophysical things that we can find out on the farm. And then we're having a discussion and focus groups that are going to dig into what people, farmers and others think about diversity and what future they imagine. So that's kind of the first step, gathering information. And the second step is pulling that information together to make some educated guesses or predictions about what the outcome might be after making either this change or this group of changes or that group of changes. And so we call that like the modeling part of this project that's in green. And then the third step is looking at those guesses or models or predictions, scenarios, and thinking about which are the most desirable, which way do you want to go? And we kind of have that classified as visioning. We don't expect just one vision, but perhaps multiple visions, several alternative visions. The final steps are about enabling those visions to come true by informing and educating. And when we're talking about agriculture, we're fully aware that policies at the state, national, and local level have a big impact on agriculture. So one of the informing and educating portions of the project is to tell the local, state, and federal legislatures and agencies about how policy can support change and more diversification based on what we learn in this project. Another really important connection is connecting with farm advisors, farmers, input providers, and others throughout the ag supply chain to share what we've learned, because those are the people who will be making the changes in their practices that result in the big changes across the system. And then finally, teaching the next generation of farmers and everyone in the supply chain assures that the understanding that we develop can be used going forward in service of the future.
Great. So that's kind of a general overview of the project, and we will go into more detail specifically about our co-production elements and our on-farm research elements, because we are in year one. We're at year 1.5, and a lot of the work that we've done involves this. So I will hand it over to Becky to share about co-production.
Thanks, Emily. So the idea of the co-production activities is to collaboratively identify research questions and build relationships that we can continue to draw on for the remaining activities in the project. So to that end, we're forming groups of stakeholders who represent different parts of the value chain, and we're calling those groups our Reimagining Agricultural Diversity, or RAD teams. And we're hoping to have a couple of groups in each state. They'll meet twice a year and will help shape our research activities, as well as give input on our research plans and preliminary findings. So one key co-production activity is our focus groups, and I'll be talking a little bit more about those for the next few slides. And since the focus group started in spring 2022, we do have some preliminary findings, and we're actually finished with data collection for that piece, which is very exciting. So we conducted about 18 farmer focus groups across the 3 I states. We had a mix of different types of farmers participate, which was fantastic, ranging from corn soy only farmers to more diversified farmers who produced multiple types of crops and livestock. And you can see here a list of our main research questions we explored with the focus groups. So there's 4 key questions, and I'll be focusing today on the first 2 questions related to how farmers understand the meaning of the term agricultural diversification and what benefits and challenges they see in the ag system, both for diversified and non-diversified agriculture. We also did talk a lot in the groups about visions for the future, as well as information needs regarding diversification. And we do have super interesting findings there, but because of our limited time today, I won't be going into depth on those. So the main goal of our analysis is to really identify the themes and issues that participants see as being most important related to those research questions. So today I'll be presenting preliminary findings, so they may shift a bit. We're about halfway through our data analysis right now, but I wanted to give you a taste of what we're seeing so far. And all of the content and figures here are from a publication that's in progress, and I'm working with the rest of our team on that. So first, for the meaning of agricultural diversification, I'll give an overview of some of those main themes that we're seeing. So participants do characterize diversification in terms of specific production systems. Many farmers describe diversification as representing a mix of different types of crops and livestock, but sometimes they also mention specific crops, for example, small grains or livestock production. Participants also talked a lot, particularly older participants, about associating diversification with their childhoods and growing up on farms prior to the 1950s, when there was a broader range of things being produced. We also heard a lot about market and enterprise diversification. So the idea that by producing value-added products, participating in alternative marketing arrangements like direct-to-consumer marketing, and through business diversification, so off-farm businesses as an example, that those really brought economic benefits for farmers. Several farmers also talked about diversification as being linked to the sustainability of the farm system and the idea that different parts of the farming system could work together to improve certain aspects like soil health. We heard a lot about creativity and out-of-the-box thinking, and that diversification could be a way to think about how to do things differently on your farm outside of that typical recipe of farming. And we also heard that diversification can occur not just at an individual farm level, but at a broader landscape level. So a vision where producers could still specialize in different types of livestock or crops, but that broader landscape could include a wider range of production systems. Labor diversification also came up a lot in terms of the opportunities diversification can bring to develop new skills or to incorporate new generations in farming. And finally, risk management was also mentioned frequently, things like having multiple income streams or providing a buffer in times of economic shocks. So now I'll go through some example quotes from our Illinois focus group for the meaning of diversification. So this first quote shows a statement about small grains production. The participant is emphasizing that they think diversification should be an incremental process and work within the systems that are already set up. And they use small grains as an example of something that they think might be more feasible for producers. And they specifically mention wheat and oats here. In the second example, the participant is talking about small grains as well as livestock. So this emphasizes the importance of livestock and how many farmers seem to view diversification. It does come up very frequently. This participant in particular is talking about how they bring their cattle out after their wheat harvest. They've got some clover left in the field, and so they're grazing the cattle on that field when their pastures are drying up. They also bring up the concept of stacked enterprises here, which I'll talk more about in a minute. So to build on that market and enterprise diversification theme for meaning of diversification, we heard a lot about this in focus groups. There seems to be a lot of interest in direct marketing from the farmers we spoke with, and several farmers were already leveraging direct marketing heavily and being really successful in terms of their ability to increase their income and also involve, for example, other family members in that marketing piece. So again, with that first quote, we see the mention of stacking enterprises. So the idea that producing multiple complementary products at the same time on your land can generate more profit while not needing to expand your land base, which has particular benefits if you do have constraints in terms of your land availability. And the second quote is really emphasizing what seems to be the appeal of direct marketing for many farmers that we talk to. So the idea that direct marketing enables producers to capture a larger percentage of those profits rather than letting the profits slip to other value chain actors. So now I'll share some preliminary findings for the what's working and what's not working in agricultural research question. So with this slide, we'll show some high-level themes that we're seeing in the data analysis so far. First, for internal decision-making factors, this includes things like farmer goals, values, and identity, as well as quality of life and well-being. Capacity includes access to technical support and information, as well as marketing skills. Next, social networks incorporates family collaboration and succession, as well as farmer networks and the influence of neighbors. And for all of these themes, I'm giving a few examples. We do have more subtopics within each of these larger themes, but I'm just giving you the highlights since we have limited time. For this inputs and capital theme, we consider use, availability, and cost of inputs, as well as labor, land, equipment, and the time required to adopt new practices. We also consider on and off farm infrastructure, as well as farm management and environmental conditions. So within that last theme is where we see a lot of environmental issues like soil health, water quality, and pests and disease. The theme for social impacts of agriculture includes nutrition and local food access, as well as broader rural community issues like education and social services. And then the last two themes are economics and markets, which comes up very frequently in focus groups. This one has many sub-themes within it, but some of the most common that we see coming up are income, prices, and productivity, and access to markets. And then policy encompasses specific frameworks like crop insurance, commodity payments, and cost share programs. And in the next stage of the analysis, we'll be exploring not just the prevalence of these themes, but also whether they're typically framed as a benefit or a challenge of the agricultural system by the farmers that we spoke with, as well as the relationships that can happen between these themes. So similarly to what I did with the meaning of diversification, I'll just go through a few example quotes to give you a sense of what we're seeing so far. And I'm still using examples from our Illinois groups. So income comes up a lot. This first example quote illustrates a participant's perspective that income-wise, many farmers are doing quite well in the current predominantly non-diversified system. And we did hear this a lot from non-diversified farmers. The next quote is along the same lines. Here, the participants talking about how they receive government payments that supplement their income and provide guaranteed revenue. So this person is really emphasizing the financial advantage of corn and soybean production over diversified products. On the other hand, with this last quote, you see that some diversified farmers also talk about the financial benefits that they see from diversification. There should be one more quote on here. Yep, thank you. And here's one example where a participant is talking about fertilizer prices. They no longer need to purchase fertilizer because they use their cow manure for that. So they're getting a cost savings in that way. Another topic that comes up very frequently in the focus groups is the importance of market access, which is linked to other issues like in this quote, infrastructure. So in several focus groups, we heard discussion of the hemp production situation. It seems that growing opportunities for hemp were pitched to farmers as potentially bringing a lot of profits and opportunity, but the majority of farmers that we spoke with saw it as being a failure for various reasons, including low market demand, and the infrastructure just wasn't really there to make it work. So this participant is telling a story about they attended a meeting focused on hemp, and although a lot of people were planting it, very few had it pre-sold. And this isn't just relevant for hemp, but also many other crops with kind of smaller or potentially niche markets. And this seems to be a very important issue from farmers' perspectives. A few other themes that are coming up frequently that I'll mention quickly. So policy. We heard about in the earlier quote that policies like commodity payments and crop insurance may favor non-diversified producers in many ways. So this participant is arguing that this is actually a problem with the current system because these policies are incentivizing decisions that may not be ideal from the perspective of longer-term economic, social, and environmental outcomes. Another thing that we heard a lot about was how easy the status quo is in comparison to diversification in terms of things like time, labor, and in some cases, quality of life as well. So these last two quotes are illustrating that. And the last example I'll give here before we move into some quick discussion is focused on nutrition, local food, and food access. This is an issue that seems to be top of mind for many of our farmer participants. Many farmers expressed an interest in wanting to grow nutritious food and contribute to the local food system, but of course, many challenges were highlighted in doing this in reality. This quote really illustrates some of the potential benefits that local food can bring in terms of diversification. So the participant is talking about the COVID pandemic and all of the supply chain issues that resulted from it. And to them, that really illustrated the reasoning for localizing the food system, which would require increasing diversification. And this was a topic that came up in several focus groups. So with that, we have a few minutes allotted for any questions or thoughts you have. I just put some example questions here to spark discussion, but really happy to hear any reactions, whether there's anything that surprised you, something you think is really important, or maybe something that's missing. And yeah, so look forward to hearing any thoughts you have.
And feel free to unmute yourself or to share your thoughts in the chat. All right, if we don't have any thoughts, that is okay. All right, thanks, Becky. Next up, we will have Carmen share some information with us about our on-farm research.
Cool. Hi everyone. And thanks to Becky. It's I have all kinds of questions for you that I'm going to chat with you about downstream later. It's fun to sort of like see the complexity of diversified production from a human perspective, and I love that themes of creativity and sort of like the decision-based challenges and complex financial issues that sort of like make agroecology into an interesting puzzle. And so we have less to show you as far as results, more of a proposal, because the on-farm research team has yet to get in the field. Our plan is to sort of like dip our toe in that this summer. So there's going to be a large team of people focusing on biodiversity across trophic levels, thinking about water infiltration and how diversification influences soil quality and all kinds of environmental metrics. Thanks for switching the slide. There's so many opportunities with a diverse project like this, and many of the research questions are taking shape, and all of us are kind of like focusing on interesting things in our relative areas of specialty. And I have like just an example proposal of a question that I might pursue in the field next year. So I'm an insect ecologist, but I kind of straddle weed science and soil science. I'm taking like a legit systems approach to thinking about what diversification might mean and how diversification might cascade across trophic levels and in agroecosystems. And it's wildly complex, along the lines of what Becky was discussing when we think about the complexity of all of the financial and labor associated issues. So we're thinking about like how diversification practices and different metrics might influence the community composition of weeds, and how that might in turn strengthen a crop's ability to compete with them naturally. And then in turn how diversification might influence a crop's ability to resist pests and also strengthen attraction of beneficial insects. So with a team that's sort of like chewing on this together as a group, includes some soil scientists that are going to be various members of this team will be on the ground in Illinois, and we're excited to meet the farmers that are going to be a part of our on-farm research. we've got Andrew Marginot and Shalimar Armstrong and Yichao Rui, which are all soil scientists that are going to be thinking about diversification and how that influences nutrient cycling and a crop's ability to uptake and retain nutrients. We've got folks that are going to be thinking about how those things cascade to the weed community and ultimately how these things shape crop productivity. And we're also going to be using some novel tools. So Ian Kaplan and Christine Elliott are at Purdue. They're going to be breaking out recording equipment across the diverse Corn Belt. And we're interested in how diversification practices might influence the diversity of insects on a farm, and we'll be starting to explore new ways to measure that via audio recordings and machine learning. It's kind of an exciting thing. But the one my favorite part about on-farm research is that we come in often with like I've presented like a sort of like a concept map that might become a model that we parameterize one day with data from the on-farm research program. And so we have a preliminary group of research questions, and a really gratifying step in this process is often learning how full of crap we are originally, as far as like what we think is important relative to what farmers and other stakeholders agree are important. So we're really curious to hear from y'all about to get some feedback, to think about what metrics of diversification might be important, like what other links in an agricultural food web might be critical to consider as we try to like adopt this systems approach to understand how diversification might strengthen interactions, and which ones will be important. So if anyone has any questions about the complex execution of diversification in rotations, in cover cropping, in fertility resource management, we're excited to discuss those. And if anyone has any suggestions for metrics that will be important for us to consider, it's still early in the process, and we're excited to incorporate feedback.
Absolutely. So again, if you want to unmute and share thoughts about that, or you can also share thoughts in the chat. And I do want to say, so as our infield or on-farm data collection team is sort of at the eve of data collection, you may have seen a Subaru with Purdue written on the side driving along I-57 and I-59 these past couple of weeks. Liz Maynard and I have been traveling across the Corn Belt, visiting farms who are participants, so that our on-farm researchers can sort of hit the ground running. So Liz and I have put about 2,000 miles on the car, visiting some great farms and really having a good time meeting farmers and learning about their diverse operation and seeing some beautiful February landscapes. Okay. So next up, we'll have Becky share some information about the third co-production objective, value chain readiness.
Yes, so we're also collecting, in addition to the qualitative data I was talking about earlier with the focus groups, we're collecting a large amount of quantitative data to better understand the perspectives of various supply chain actors towards diversification. So what are they excited about in terms of diversification, but also what concerns might they have about feasibility? And this table here on the bottom of the slide shows an overview of some of those data collection efforts. And I'll be giving a little bit more detail on our farmer survey, which is the first survey mentioned in that table, since that's one of my main projects that I'm helping with at DCB. We do have a few other surveys in development, including the ones for buyers and marketing and trade organizations. So that's very exciting. So our farmer survey went out to 3,300 farmers in the I-states in late January. And so it's being collected right now and should finish up in the next month. You can see a photo there of our beautiful survey. So for the research questions here, we have a few main topics that we're trying to investigate. So first, we're really trying to understand those main barriers and opportunities that farmers identify regarding agricultural diversification. And within that, we're trying to understand to what extent are farmers interested in and willing to pursue diversification and why, and then to what extent are farmers already diversifying. So for the second main research question, we're looking at identifying which diversification scenarios are most appealing to farmers, and that will feed into our tasks on land use change modeling, which I think you'll hear a little bit more about later. And then third, we're looking at which interventions and incentives to support diversification are most important, which will feed into our policy efforts, among others. So in order to explore those research questions, we designed the survey to have these broad sections that you see listed here, and I'll just give some quick examples of how we incorporated them in the survey. So first, we asked farmer participants about what they're doing already in terms of diversification and whether they consider their operations to be diversified. We have an extensive list of potential barriers and opportunities for diversification that we created based on our focus group data collection, as well as a literature review. And we asked participants to rank how important those various factors are from their perspectives. So one example would be in terms of market-related factors. Do participants think that farmer-led co-ops or longer-term contracts could help support diversification? We also asked participants questions on their perspectives about diversification. So for example, do you think more diversified systems or more specialized systems are better equipped to handle various challenges, whether that's feeding an increasing population, responding to environmental shocks, or creating local jobs? We asked participants if they wish they had more choices regarding the kinds of crops and livestock they could produce, and what they think about the comparative costs and benefits of diversification. So for this survey, we placed a high emphasis on the 5 diversified production systems at the farm level that Emily mentioned earlier. So things like agroforestry, perennials, and those other systems. And for each of those 5 systems, we asked a set of questions. So for example, how familiar is the participant with the system? Do they already use it? And if so, for how long? Do they know others in their area or neighborhood that use it? And we also asked whether participants would be willing to adopt those systems in the future, and if so, where would they adopt them on their farm, and would they require a monetary incentive? So that's really trying to get at some of the more future-oriented look at willingness to adopt. We do also have some open response questions to account for potentially other practices that participants might consider to be diversified, but that don't fit in those 5 systems that we talked about. And I think that's it for the survey.
Great, thanks, Becky. So next up, we have our objective 2. So like we said before, sort of our co-production or our first objective, sort of what we have updates to share about it, sort of the meat and potatoes of what we've been doing so far. So these next couple of objectives will kind of give a high-level overview of what you can expect to hear from us throughout the next years. So Liz.
That's great. Thanks, Emily. And I have to say the modeling objective, if you remember, that's the looking at the, pulling the information together and developing some educated guesses or predictions about what's going to happen. We have a great modeling team, of which I am not a member of them, but I will try and briefly summarize, as Becky said, as Emily said, give you an overview. So they're going to bring together the information that's collected in the focus group surveys, through the RAD team, the on-farm research, market surveys, as well as in existing databases, and develop some database guesses or predictions about what changes might occur in the landscape and elsewhere, given different sets of changes on the ground. So some portions of the modeling focus on what changes are likely at a landscape level. For instance, based on changes farmers would make in response to a specific policy change that might happen. And one might ask, where would there, given a certain policy change, would there be more pasture? If so, where would it be? If people were going to diversify more, where might they diversify? And then how would those changes influence air quality and greenhouse gases in the region? Some of the other modelings focus on a smaller scale, for instance, modeling effects in specific watersheds or specific food sheds. If these changes happen on the land, what changes would you expect to see in that water quality or in the way food is distributed around that area? And then some modeling is down to the farm level, the nuts and bolts economic modeling about how different rotations or crop mixes or integrated livestock production combined with different policies would influence profitability or other economic measures on an individual farm level. And then all of those different types of models would be combined to create a few different scenarios or alternative visions for the future that kind of approach those goals that Emily talked about of improved sustainability in economic, social, and environmental means. Those models will also be helpful in quantifying sustainability metrics, metrics that are used in marketing for marketing purposes or to assess sustainability for other purposes. So that's a really high level overview of what the modeling team will be working on.
Great, thanks, Liz. Next, we'll have Becky talk to us a little bit about our visioning.
Yes, so the visioning portion of the project is going to bring together people through those re-envisioning agricultural diversity teams that I talked about earlier to really dig into the different possible scenarios in the future for land use, markets, and policy, and identify which scenarios may be more or less desirable. So during those sessions, we'll collect input on our research results, for example, the modeling that Liz just talked about, and then refine our research based on that input. And the plan is for these to be really interactive discussions where we can discuss what alternatives exist to the current system while keeping an eye to future trends that may impact agriculture. And we'll collaboratively identify the intermediate steps that would be necessary to work towards these different possible futures. And I think the visioning represents a really exciting aspect of the Diverse Corn Belt Project, since this really illustrates our focus on collaborative research. And of course, we'll draw upon the knowledge and creativity of all of these different agricultural stakeholders, as well as all of the outputs from preceding parts of the project, including the focus groups and the in-field data collection.
Great, thanks, Becky. So as we sort of move out of our scenario planning objectives, we are moving into our disseminating the information objectives. So objective 4 is policy guidance. So it is a very important objective of the Diverse Corn Belt that our findings are both policy relevant and able to be integrated into the decision-making process at local, state, and federal levels. Based on the earlier stages of our research, we'll identify policy changes that are needed to address these challenges that participants have shared for challenges on the landscape, as well as challenges across the supply chain. For example, this could include challenges with market demands for diversified crops, the need for enhanced research and development for diversified production systems, or challenges with workforce training and labor availability. The policy guidance will be directly informed by what we learned in the earlier stages of our research co-production with participants from the ag sector, as well as with potential and existing buyers of diversified crops and livestock. And this information will also be gathered through our reimagining agricultural diversity teams that we discussed earlier in the vision sessions. In year 5 of the project, so the final year of the project, we will develop and communicate these alternative policy options to federal decision makers in Washington, D.C. through invitation-only events and legislative visits. We will also be preparing specific materials tailored to state and local governments to sort of let them know about what we find and, you know, share our recommendations. And next up, Liz is going to share about how we'll be engaging with our stakeholders.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so another critical part of enabling the changes that are envisioned is sharing what we learn really broadly. And so, of course, stakeholder engagement is happening all throughout the project as collaborators on the in-field teams and the RAD teams and the focus groups and so on participate in the information gathering part, but also at the end, getting information out to the people who are going to be making the changes and to a broader group of people all along the supply chain is really important. So that's what this section is about. And if you can move on to the next slide, we've got a couple of several different organizations involved in this. So there's the Cooperative Extension Services in Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana, our I states. We'll all be working on this. Practical Farmers of Iowa, and the Sustainable Food Lab. Through extension, we'll share what we learn in the project with farmers, farm advisors, food processors, retailers, communities, consumers. On the one specific thing we're planning for next year is we expect to have educational field days at some of the on-farm research sites since 2004 to both to let people see what's going on these different types of farms, and also to see how the research is being done and get a handle on what types of questions are being asked and how they're being answered. We know that there's a lot of existing organizations with information about diversified production, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So we expect to partner with a lot of other groups to reach audiences and share information that's relevant to changing practices. We're also thinking about whether there might be a need for new approaches to extension by listening to the stakeholders, thinking about what are the best ways to get information out and to share information that makes sense for a project like this. The Practical Farmers of Iowa is a key member of the team. They've been involved in researching and supporting alternative practices for many years. Variety trials of small grains are one specific effort that they are working on, contributing specifically to this project. The Sustainable Food Lab works with supply chain companies to connect their sustainability commitments to investments in farmers and farming communities. And in this project, in collaboration with PFI, they'll be developing a pilot market to support diversified production in the region. So we have a network or a team of people involved in getting information out and engaging directly with people in along the supply chain to improve diversity in the region. And then we will plan to partner with the many other organizations who are working in related efforts.
Great, thanks, Liz. And then finally, rounding it out, we have our sixth objective, education. So informed by the expertise of DCB researchers as well as DCB findings, our education team is developing models. So they will create, pilot and publish educational modules at the high school and undergraduate level that sort of outlines some of these big questions and big problems that we've been talking about today. In addition to the modules that they're developing, they're also working on a Midwestern Sustainable Ag Tour, which would be an experimental multi-institutional field course. So the way that this sort of output or field course has been envisioned is sort of think of a study abroad, but rather a study of Midwestern sustainable ag. So an immersive course where we get folks from multiple institutions, so you can have some networking ability and then also be able to see some sustainable agriculture in person, front row. But yeah, generally, the education team is focused on fostering a workplace, a workforce that is prepared to respond to emerging challenges, and that can support a more diversified landscape in the future. So with that, I also want, so that's sort of all of our objectives. I do want to highlight our advisory committee. So we have a diverse advisory committee full of companies as well as farmers. We have NGOs as well as some government agencies. And this group is sort of there to sort of guide us, help us make sure that we're on the right track and sort of be a sounding board for ideas that we have. So these, our advisory committee, we're very grateful for them and sort of the feedback that they give us. And finally, I do just want to highlight, I think one of the big benefits or, one of the big strengths of the Diverse Corn Belt team is that we have such a large team and we are very interdisciplinary. So as you can see here, there's quite a few folks on our team representing lots of different institutions, lots of different companies and organizations. So I think with our diverse expertise, we can really kind of address a lot of these questions that we're bringing up. So I guess at the end of the day, the Diverse Corn Belt Project, we're about 1.5 years in for a 5-year project. We don't anticipate changing the landscape in 5 years. But an overarching goal for the Diverse Corn Belt Project is to advance the conversation about diversification. And with that, I just want to thank everybody for attending today, and thank you to the Illinois Stewardship Alliance for hosting a wonderful week. And if you are interested in learning more about the Diverse Corn Belt Project, we're on Twitter, Instagram, or Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. We have our website there. And if you'd like to get on our newsletter, you can scan that QR code and that'll take you to a survey where you can sign up for our newsletter. And that is all of the information we have for you all. And we are happy to answer any questions that you guys may have for us. Helen.
Yeah, thanks for this great presentation. Yeah, excited to learn more about the project and watch it continue. I'm curious about the farmers that you're working with and whether like farmer like storytelling and like sharing their stories, not like I understand that it's like anonymized probably for a lot of the research, but I'm wondering if that's something that is in your plans, is to kind of like highlight some of those farmers.
Yes, I would say that's absolutely in the plan in a couple different ways. So I think our education team would like to get some farmers' voices in some of their modules. But I also think in terms of extension and extending our information, I think that incorporating the farmer voice into sort of our results is very important. And it's definitely something that that is on our radar, and we're looking to do that for sure. Great question. Gregory.
Hi, I appreciate, it looks like a really exciting project. So I was wondering also about the farmers in the survey and the focus groups. Are you making an effort to get a representative sample of farmers, or are you targeting farmers that are already interested in some type of diversification?
That's a great question. I'm going to hand that question off to Becky.
Yes, thanks so much for that. So the sampling approach is a little bit different for the focus groups in the survey. So for the survey, we are trying to get a range of different types of farmers. So that's kind of a stratified random sampling approach. We're trying to get, both farmers that are producing primarily corn, soy, as well as farmers that are producing 3 or more crops with different types of grains and horticulture. And we're looking primarily at farmers that produce over 40 acres for the survey in particular. So that's where we're really trying to get a range of perspectives. For the focus groups, what we did was about halfway through our data collection, we kind of paused and we looked at, okay, what types of farmers are we reaching? Because that's a little bit more of a opportunistic sampling approach, since we're engaging with our networks and through extension and things like that to engage with those farmers, versus the survey, which we're using farm address data. So for the focus groups, we took that look at the farmers we were engaging with so far, and then we tried to prioritize the final stage of data collection to reach farmers that we hadn't been reaching as much. And what you mentioned was happening, in that we were tending to engage more with diversified farmers for the focus groups, likely because, those farmers see the little recruitment letter, they're excited about it because they really want to learn about it, or they're already doing it and they have a lot of thoughts. And maybe those corn soy farmers see it and they say, well, I don't know if I have much to contribute, or this isn't for me, and so on. So we really focused this final stage of our data collection, which was over the last couple of months, in trying to engage with more corn and soy only farmers. That way we have a broader representation across all of those 5 production systems, as well as non-diversified farmers. And I think that was really beneficial. It's still not representative in that sense, but we do have a wider variety of farmers that we're engaging with. And it was really beneficial to hear all their thoughts. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thank you. That's appreciate that. In terms of groups that may be partners, Greenland's Blue Waters is a group has been working in a similar direction. I'm wondering if to what extent they may be engaged as well.
Yeah, so we've worked with, we sort of have a little like networking group of other folks who are social scientists doing this type of work. And Greenland's Blue Waters is definitely part of that group. So we work with them and kind of share some of our materials. So sharing resources for surveys and sharing information about who were sort of target areas that we're focusing on. So trying not to overtax or over ask folks and trying not to be duplicative. But yes, we are working with Greenland's Blue Waters.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions, Greg. Do we have any more questions or comments that anyone would like to share? Well, with that, I think that we can conclude our presentation today. And I just again want to thank the Illinois Stewardship Alliance for hosting us, and thank you all for joining us today.
I
Oh, we
see
have another question.
one more question in the comments.
Oh, yes.
Wondering if land tenure was a theme that emerged in the focus groups.
Great question. I'm going to hand that off to Becky.
Yes, absolutely. That did come up a lot. And for example, in the lens that, renters might have less vested interest in investing in all of the equipment, upfront costs related to diversification. So that came up a lot. We also had some interesting discussions about landowners and the role that landowners can play in terms of contracts and requesting specific practices. So that did come up fairly frequently. And we had a lot of farmers, of course, who are doing a mix of some owned land and some rented land. And we even had one participant with more insight into that kind of landowner relationship. So I think we'll be able to dive into that a bit more with the manuscript. So that's exciting. Thanks for that question.
And I guess another interesting, maybe tangential, but definitely related theme that we kind of found was, so people who have an idea. So if somebody is farming and they know that they'll be giving their farm to, or not giving, but if they will have their family continuing to farm with them, so with their children or etc., that's also been something that has been kind of come up. So like, well, I know that my son I want to bring my son into the operation, and sort of how that sort of impacts their decision to diversify. All right. Well, thank you all for a great morning, and I hope you all have a great rest of your Friday. Bye-bye.